life is rich in significance and detail, and many excellent biographies have been written in English to communicate its details and explore its significance. But for the purposes of this class, we can try to outline what are the big moments in Muhammad's life and prophetic career. So, of course, we could begin with his birth, which has been traditionally attributed to 570 CE, the year 570 CE. This is known as the year of the elephant, which I will explain why in a moment. And we should acknowledge that this year is not precisely known, or something we can be sure of. The need and desire to keep track of people's birthdays and birth years has only been a recent phenomenon in the last few hundred years, with the emergence of nation states where a nation will try to keep track of who's who among their citizens, and part of doing this is not just a name, but also giving people a surname, and also having their birthday known to distinguish one person with such a name from another person with such a name. Of course, it's been popularized by Hallmark, the need and desire to keep track of people's births and celebrate them. But this is a recent phenomenon. It's people generally didn't know their birthdays, and nor really keeping track of their birth years was something deemed unimportant. But Muhammad's life, whether he was born that year or not, has been known as the year 570, the year of the elephant. And this year was, whether he was born that or not, it was a significant year, because it is said that an empire from the south, from Yemen, was conquering the Western Arabian desert north of them, and came into Mecca at that year. And it seemed like even though the Yemenis had superior forces and came on elephants and armored elephants, and that Meccans would be destroyed, the Meccans were able to rally to resist them. And there's even a chapter of the Quran which refers to this year and says that birds came from above and dropped rocks and stones on the Yemeni forces to help the Meccans resist them. Kind of a miraculous intervention to help stop them. So, because it's a significant year within Meccan history, may be the reason why 570 was chosen, but might also be possible that Muhammad was actually born in the year 570. So it is said that his mother died when he was about 5 or 6 years old. His father had died when he was still a fetus. He was left officially an orphan. He was raised then by his grandfather, and then his grandfather died a few years later, and then he was raised by his uncle. He participated in the trade of his uncle and became a merchant and caravan driver, and then he came to work for a wealthy widow and business owner, executive, CEO, Khadija, and became kind of her right-hand man. And after showing himself very trustworthy and capable in business and a good man, she proposed marriage to him in 595, and they got married when he was about 25 years old. Now, traditional accounts say that Khadija was about 15 years older than him. Now, if we take the Sunni, and we'll talk about the differences between Sunnis and Shias in a later lecture, but we take the Sunni rendition of history. This is probably somewhat of an exaggeration. Other Sunni sources say that she wasn't quite that much older than him. It may have been a handful of years, rather than the full 15. Indeed, as they managed to have 8 or 9 children, even though only half of them survived past childhood, we can say then even if she was having a child a year, it would have been very difficult biologically to be that old and having that many children. But they managed to have a number of daughters and a son. The son died when he was very small, and 4 daughters, according to most accounts, survived into adulthood. Now, according to Shia accounts, the daughters were most likely stepdaughters of Muhammad, daughters of Khadijah only from a previous marriage, and the one daughter that they had, the one child they had, was a daughter named Fatima. Fatima, who becomes very holy and special to Shia history. Now, if the Shia account is right, then we can say maybe yes, she was 15 years older, and they just had managed to have one child together during their marriage, as her biological systems were older at that time. Okay, so she was the first believer in Islam and a very um, strong advocate and supporter of Muhammad's revelation and Muhammad's prophethood. So in 610, Muhammad has the encounter with the celestial being, which becomes known and identified with the angel Gabriel at a cave on Mount Hira, and he continues to have encounters with this angelic being through the remainder of his next 23 years, in which he's reciting and proclaiming the Quran. Now, Muhammad at first proclaims his revelation very, very slowly, only to his immediate family members and close friends. And in the first few years after this encounter, you can probably count the number of Muslims on both hands. But then he gets pushed or pressured or commissioned, we could say, by these angelic or supernatural forces to proclaim more readily and aloud, and starts making more public declarations of his mission. And then, but by the next 13 years, there's Muslims in the hundreds rather than just in the dozen of the first few years after this encounter. Muslims are persecuted. There's reasons, both political fear that Muhammad's trying to take power, as well as fear that he's trying to destroy the religious center of Meccan's life, being the Kaaba, with its many gods, whether there's actually 360 or 365 gods. We can think of it as one for every day of the year, and that there's just lots of gods that had figures and representations in there and were worshipped there. But they feared that with his changes in the religion, people would no longer want to come from everywhere around the greater area of the desert to worship their gods there and engage in economic trade as well. This was not just a religious center, religious tradition, but also had economic interests as a center of economic life for the Meccans. And so, for these political, religious, and economic reasons, they opposed Muhammad. They persecuted his followers. Some of his followers ended up emigrating to Abyssinia, which is roughly correlates to modern day Ethiopia in northeast Africa. And it's said that the just and compassionate king, when he heard about the Muslims and what they're doing and what they're believing, had the eye of sympathy upon the Muslims and allowed them a haven and refuge within his kingdom to live peacefully, inspired by the common message of the worship of one God and the truth of the prophets of the past. So it is said that in 621 CE, Muhammad had something called the Miraj, or the night journey, and it's said that he would often go to the Kaaba to pray to just the one God. And at this night, he stayed there so late, he put his head down and just decided to sleep set his head against the Kaaba. And while sleeping, the angel Gabriel came to him, woke him up, and had a mythical creature named Barak, which is said to have had a body of a horse or a mule, but a head of a man. And Muhammad was taken by the angel Gabriel on this horse, and with each leap it would travel many miles, and within a very, very short time they make their way to Jerusalem. And there Muhammad has encounter with the prophets of the past, prophets who have passed, and he leads them in prayer. And then he ascends from that point 7 layers of heaven, has encounter with God, is given the decree or command to have 5 prayers, and Muhammad is escorted back to Mecca in a single night. There's a lot of doubts by both Muhammad's followers as well as persecutors about the veracity of his reported dream or vision or experience. But according to some histories, Muhammad was said to have reported on what caravans were coming into town, give specific details about caravans that were miles and miles away. And when those caravans showed up the next few days, they had second thoughts and said maybe this night journey was truly something that happened, not just in a kind of inner visionary sense, but in a true factual everyday life sense, everyday waking life sense. Muhammad's uncle and protector dies around this time. Muhammad's wife Khadija had died around this time. The persecutions become more fierce. Muhammad and the believers. Muhammad is hears of plans to attack and kill him, which all the clans of the Quraysh were going to bind together and as one kill him. Muhammad arranges to flee from Mecca to the city of Yathrib, which became known as Medina. Medina meaning city, short for city of the Prophet. And Muhammad, with his companion Abu Bakr and his friend and cousin Ali, leaving behind in Muhammad's bed, left behind in Muhammad's bed, Muhammad was able to successfully flee to Yathrib, where he had been invited to become something of a mediator between the conflicting tribes within Yathrib. He soon becomes not just a mediator, but the central political leader of Yathrib itself. It is said that when Muhammad was fleeing Mecca with Abu Bakr, he and Abu Bakr stopped in some hills where there are some caves to hide the pursuers, the Qurayshi Meccans who had seen that Muhammad had left in the night, and so they were in hot pursuit, and they hid within a cave, a different cave than Muhammad's revelation. And Abu Bakr was very frightened that they would see them inside the cave, as it was a very small cave. And however, when the Qurayshi Meccans came close, they saw not just a tree, but a bird's nest in front of the cave and a spider web that was in front of the cave. And so this is a Turkish painting from about 400 to 500 years ago, which depicts the life of Muhammad. And you can see the Meccans in fast pursuit, and Muhammad and Abu Bakr were supposedly inside this cave, and they decided that they couldn't be hiding inside the cave because the spy wouldn't have had time to create the web on the entrance of the cave, let alone a bird would, with its eggs and nests, would want to be there when human beings are so close nearby. And so they passed this cave up and continued to search him elsewhere, and this was seen as a miracle that helped Muhammad and Abu Bakr escape the chase of the Meccans tribes within Yathrib. He soon becomes not just a mediator, but the central political leader of Yathrib itself. Muhammad is able to expand the following of Muslims beyond the followers that were of Mecca to surrounding areas, to Yathrib, Medina itself, and he becomes the political leader of a city-state, and not just a religious leader, something like a theocracy being established. Now Muhammad's followers had fled and left their goods and livelihoods and homes behind, and were left with nothing to survive financially, economically, those who had fled with him to Yathrib. And so Muhammad organized a plan to regain some of their wealth that had been expropriated by the Quraysh Meccans, and that was a plan to raid caravans, which was a common practice and not seen as necessarily piracy if there was a legitimate reason to it. And so Muhammad's, uh, along with his followers, often just his followers who are from Mecca, would raid these caravans of the Quraysh coming north, nearby, having to pass Yathrib and take many of their goods. Now, as you can imagine, this irritated and annoyed greatly the Quraysh, who are trying to engage in their own businesses, and soon they organized what was supposed to be a surprise attack to destroy much of the following of Muhammad when they were planning another caravan raid. And however, Muhammad and his followers were semi-prepared for this attack and were able, at least enough, to get some sort of strategy, even though they're greatly outnumbered. According to the Quran and Hadith, the Muslims were reinforced by angelic hosts. Angelic beings help them win the battle. Whether this happened in a visual sense or invisible sense, it's not known, but this is the legend. And they were able to come out victorious with relatively minor injuries or casualties of the Battle of Badr in 624 CE. Now, other battles ensued. One was sometimes the Muslims would win, sometimes the Meccans would win. And one of the battles in which the Muslims won again was the Battle of the Trench, so named because an advisor to Muhammad, a Persian believer, told him about a way to dig trenches in which protected enemy forces to be able to enter and get past a certain demarker to attack the forces. And so, because this ended up being a very helpful strategy of self-defense, this became known as the Battle of the Trench, in which the Muslims also won. But there was more casualties due to, according to the legends, a tribe of the Jewish who gave certain secrets about what was happening in the battle efforts, and helped the Meccans achieve an upper hand in some aspects of the battle. And so this had dire consequences for the immediate relations with that Jewish tribe, as well as later representations and interactions with Jewish people. Although Jews and Muslims have often got along, there's often a representation of them as untrustworthy and suspicious. And okay, so Muhammad and his forces are gaining the upper hand, and they decide that they want to take a pilgrimage, a Hajj. This is one of the 5 pillars of Islam today, Hajj, or a pilgrimage. They want to take a pilgrimage to Mecca. They go towards Mecca for this pilgrimage. The force of Meccans greet them, and a battle does not ensue, but negotiations do, and the Muslims are told, you can come back next year, you can do your pilgrimage peacefully, but not now. And this becomes known as the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which from then on, basically, Muhammad and his body politic would be recognized as the authority in the area, rather than Meccans continuing to resist and attack them. Okay, so there's a pilgrimage to Mecca in 629 CE. Sometimes these dates are changed slightly. Okay, maybe 629 CE and 630 CE, but this is a common rendition of the dates that these events happen. And in the pilgrimage to Mecca, Muhammad is said to, with some companions, to have destroyed the idols in the Kaaba, only leaving one stone, which was a symbol of Allah, what was before the high God, and Muhammad's expression of it, the one true and only universal God, all except for a black stone that represented Allah, all other physical objects that represented the gods and goddesses were destroyed, and the Kaaba became dedicated to monotheism, or the worship of one God. So, corollary, Mecca surrenders at this time, and Muhammad, as the leader, the political and religious leader of much of Western Arabia, dies in 632 CE.